Very excited to have returning to the show, Blue Jays insider and one half of At the Letters podcast, Ben Nicholson-smith. Welcome back to the Walk-Off, man.
Guys, thanks for having me. It's good to be back. It's good to be talking Blue Jays, and yeah, a lot of intrigue ahead. I think this offseason, so should be an interesting month or so.
It's an exciting offseason for sure because you just know there's going to be some major stuff that happens. By the way, before we even get into it, congrats on a great 2023, man. I always really enjoy your content, whether it's articles, whether it's podcasts, and you spent some time in the radio booth this year. How was that?
It was so fun. Yeah, it's always fun to be able to experience different ways of watching a ball game. Being in the radio booth is definitely a different way. It's
Because
like
you'd never done that before, right?
Well, last year I did about a couple dozen games, so I did a
Right.
bunch in 2022 as well.
Yeah.
And then this year did more than that, and got the chance to work alongside Ben Wagner, who's such a pro, and a few games along with
Oh,
Ben
Ben.
Schulman as well. So really enjoyed it. As you know, all the different vantage points are a little different. So watching a game, in that setting is a little different than writing. It's a little different than working a Blue Jays Central game. So it's a fun gig for sure, and the radio was a really fun part of that this year.
So, Ben, was 2023 as weird and difficult to report on as it was to kind of follow as a fan? Did it feel like a weird year to you?
It felt really weird. Yeah, it felt super weird. I think that, going into the season, there were such high expectations for this team. The players themselves had high expectations. I think those of us in the media had high expectations. Certainly the fans did as well, and rightfully so. This is a good team. Should have been better than what they were. I think we've all kind of come to terms with that or relived that enough times by now. But yeah, I think that like reporting on it wasn't more challenging than it would be in any other year. Other than the fact that anytime a team is losing or underperforming, they're obviously going to be a little bit less pleased with themselves, and that's going to impact the vibes to some extent. But otherwise, there's so many storylines. There's so many more stories that I would want to write in a given year that I have time to write.
Mhm.
So it's not as though there's a shortage of interesting things to talk about with this team, even as they were underperforming and failing to reach the heights that they should have.
I know you mentioned vibes. Were the vibes off a little?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think all season, really. I mean, maybe with the exception of they got off to a pretty good start, but then once May hit, they started struggling. And then, June, they're still kind of behind the eight ball. You go into the All-Star break, they're not really where they want to be. Go to the trade deadline, like they get better, but it wasn't a transformative trade deadline, and they keep kind of scuffling along. So to me, the vibes were off all year. I it's hard to quantify. It's hard to say, you know, how that's going to change next year. It will change. Like
Mhm.
the vibes might be worse next year. They might be better. Who knows? But it will be different because each year brings its own set of vibes. But this year, yeah, it was definitely off. It wasn't good.
There is a lot of heavy lifting to do on this front office's part to fill some of these holes. I know that so far Major League Baseball free agency has been pretty slow moving. We've seen the pitching market move a little bit. We just saw Aaron Nola resign with the Phillies. Just this morning, it's reported Sonny Gray is going to the Cardinals. And I know you don't have a crystal ball, but any idea on when we could see some significant movement? Is everyone just waiting on Ohtani right now?
I think it's got to start soon, right? Like, there's so many names out there, so many players that need new homes for next year. To say nothing of the trade activity that we're expecting that should be pretty busy in the next little stretch. So yeah, I think there's got to be activity starting this week. Certainly the week of the winter meetings, which is next week. I would expect a lot of activity. So I think the next 10 days we'll see a lot of movement. And Otani's clearly the number one, clearly the player who will free up the most money elsewhere and the most roster spots and kind of lend a lot of clarity to some of the other decisions happening around the sport. But even beyond Otani, I do think that we're going to start to see a lot of movement in the next 10 days or so.
In a how aggressive do you expect the Blue Jays to be, like in terms of trades or free agents? Is this a year where we should expect them to overspend as opposed to being more responsible and missing out, or is this going to be a continuation of we want to get our guys, but we know what a reasonable price to pay is, and we'd rather miss out and be responsible than overspend? Like, where do you see the tone here, the approach?
Yeah, it's a huge question for them to figure out internally, because if you decide, hey, we're going to push a little more aggressively this winter and maybe set aside our own valuations for the sake of landing a certain player, then that changes everything. I think historically we've seen the Blue Jays be very process oriented, very deliberate when it comes to their free agent approaches, but at the same time they've been aggressive. So I would expect the same thing this offseason, with one exception that I'm sure we'll get to. But I think really this is a front office that they went pretty big for George Springer, Kevin Gausman, Chris Bassett, signed Jose Barrios to a big extension, traded aggressively for Dalton Varsho. I mean, we can have our opinions as to whether that deal was a good one or not, but it definitely was aggressive. Same with the Matt Chapman trade, the Barrios trade. Like, they make big moves, and that's, we've seen that year after year. They make big moves, they make big signings. That's absolutely going to happen this year. They are absolutely going to be adding multiple players, like 4 or 5 players. They have to. When Ross Atkins said it's 1 to 4 bats, I'm thinking, one? Like, there's one is not enough. Like, this team, they just lost 4 out the window. So, and I think it's pretty clear, as I've written many times now, that they need multiple bats. So they're going to be busy. They will be aggressive. They will be on a lot of those players that are out there in free agency and trade. And then of course the one player that you probably have to set aside your traditional valuations is Shohei Ohtani.
So before we get into speculation, sorry, Adam, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we always know that there's like the Toronto tax. We have to overpay to bring a guy in. How significant is that going to be with a Shohei Ohtani? Like, when we're talking a $500 million contract, how much does Toronto realistically need to up the price of the next bidder in order to even have him entertain the thoughts of coming to Canada?
And if you're going to spend $500 million, what's $500 million and $20 million, right? Like, what's $520,000
Exactly. I think there's something, I'm sure, psychologists have figured that one out to a T, but I think it's true of all of us, right? If you're buying something for $500 and there's another $20 on for the warranty, all of a sudden that just, you don't even really think about it. Of course, there's no warranty for Ohtani. He's he's human like everyone else, right? So I think it's going to be really interesting. I think that the Toronto tax exists for some players, and for others it's really not a factor. So I don't know Shohei Ohtani's preferences nearly well enough to speculate on that for him. He's held his cards very close to the vest throughout this entire process. And so, you hear scuttlebutt that he really is comfortable on the West Coast and likes Southern California and might prefer to stay in Southern California, all things being equal. But clearly he's open to bids from other cities as well. So I would be speculating for him specifically when it comes to Toronto. I do think that, when you look broadly, some players are really happy to come here. Other players, it's just a non-starter. Like, there are some, including some current free agents, where it's like, you're not even gonna have the conversation because they don't want to come here. Now, that's not just Toronto. The same could be said, I'm sure, of Seattle or of Miami, or some players just have geographic preferences that they don't want to be in certain spots. And the main, there's some exceptions to that where, like, typically Los Angeles, New York, those are places that are pretty appealing to free agents, broadly speaking. But short of that, Cincinnati, like, there's probably a Cincinnati tax. There's probably a St. Louis tax. We just don't necessarily talk about it as much.
That's a good point.
You mentioned the fact that this team, they have multiple holes to fill, right? Especially on the bat side of things. And if you had to take an educated guess, how many of these Blue Jays needs, whether it be third base, second base, left field, bullpen, pitching, wherever it may be, how many of these do you think this season could be filled internally? Do you think that we're going to see some of these spots filled from within the organization?
I do think we will. And I think that some of them are more easily filled internally than others. If you're the Jays, I think you need to be open to acquiring second baseman, for example. But if you start the season with Kevin Biggio batting against right-handed pitchers and Santiago Espinal hitting against left-handed pitchers, that's totally fine. Or even if Davis Schneider's in that mix against lefties with Espinal, that's totally fine. So second base is a position they can fill internally. Same with DH. Like they can do some sort of mix and match, have your catcher, whoever's not catching that day, get in there sometimes, maybe a bit of Springer, maybe you do a little bit of, is it a Horwitz? Is it a Davis Schneider? Like they can cover DH internally and second base. The two spots that I think they can't cover internally, at least to start the season, would be third base and left field. And I think you have to go outside the organization. I mean, even if it is Matt Chapman, a player in whom they continue to have interest, you have to sign someone or trade for someone at third base. I don't think you want Kevin Biggio playing every day there defensively. And then I think that once you get to the offensive side of things, sure, Barger or Relvis Martinez, like these guys could contribute maybe later in the season. You don't want to open the season with that. So you need someone who has some established ability against major league pitching to handle that position to open the year. And then whether it's a left fielder or a center fielder, you need someone along with Dalton Varsho, because the other thing is George Springer was pretty healthy this past season, but he might need some DH time. Like they just don't have enough major league caliber outfielders. And again, that could change as the season progresses. Maybe an Alan Roden becomes more viable in that spot. But to open the season, there is no way they can really fill outfield and third base internally as I see it.
So let's talk Matt Chapman a little bit here, because I know that there is this feeling amongst the fan base that they don't really wish to see him return. And I think it just had a lot to do with his 2023 season, the ups and downs that everyone dealt with, and just how he performed at the end of the year. However, the truth is, Matt Chapman is a really good third baseman. And I guess my question for you, Ben, is, in your opinion, what would the term and money look like to be a good fit? Because I know personally, I really don't wish to see Matt Chapman for $160 million in 6 years. But if there's somewhere in the middle, I'm a lot more warm on that re-signing.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. I suspect that people within the Blue Jays organization would probably see it similarly to you. No one said that to me, but they clearly have interest in Matt Chapman. They're on record saying that they want to bring him back. They made him the 1-year qualifying offer. That's a real offer at $20 million or so for 1 year. Now, if the price gets to 140 to 170, which is like not unreasonable when you look at what Javi Baez and Trevor Story got, and you look at what Dansby Swanson got, and those guys were shortstops, but Chapman, really, really good defensive player. He can contribute on offense, but there's holes in his offensive game, as we saw at stretches last season. So, yeah, I mean, that's a player that Scott Boras could make a really strong case for big time money. And if a team like the Giants decides that they are going to spend, maybe they miss on Ohtani, maybe they miss on Yamamoto, Bellinger, all of a sudden they're sitting there. It's like, who's our guy? Hard to find a better option at that point than Chapman. And I wouldn't be surprised if he gets 150 over 6 from San Francisco, reunites with Farhan Zaidi and Bob Melvin. That could completely work. But what if the Giants do get Yamamoto and maybe they go a little cheaper, and at third base they acquire like Isak Paredes from the Rays or something, and then it's like, okay, they don't need a third baseman anymore. And, the Cubs get Bellinger and the Yankees get Soto, and like Chapman's kind of sitting there, doesn't necessarily have a place to go. I don't know. At that point, the Jays definitely could be in on him. Is that 4 years times, I don't know, 26, something like that? Like, that's not so unreasonable. Is it 5 times 22? Like, I don't know what the structure would look like. That's speculation on my part, but there could be deals that are short of that mega deal that would fit for both sides.
That makes sense.
But yeah, we'll see. I mean, Chapman's obviously aiming high, as he should, and deserving of a very, very big contract.
If you were to put a percentage chance on him needing to take a 1-year high AVV deal, do you think that's even a possibility?
It's a good question. I would put the percentage chance at like 3 to 5.
Okay. So the market would need to fall out on him.
Yeah. Yeah. that would be I'd be really surprised, but I'm not saying zero. Like I wouldn't be
Yeah.
stunned, but I don't think it's happening.
So obviously, if there is one area with this Blue Jays organization where they're kind of set up, it is their starting pitching. Now, there are question marks, obviously, there. I think one of the biggest for me, anyways, is Alec Monoa. And I'm really curious what your thoughts are on Alec, what you've heard, and if, because you always hear those stuff, Alec Monoa is not going to be a Blue Jay in 2024. Is there a possibility the Jays sell low on an Alec Monoa?
I think there's a chance. I think there's been a chance ever since things went south for Manoa and for the team and what they were able to get out of him this past season. Clearly, a very frustrating year for Manoa and for the Blue Jays. He's in the process of getting himself back to full strength and working out in Florida as he prepares for the coming season. Clearly, a bounce back candidate for 2024. And I think if you're the Jays, you have to be open to the possibility of moving players like Manoa. At the same time, I think with so many other pitchers out there on the trade market, whether that's Glasnow, Corbin Burns, Shane Bieber, I don't know that another team looks at Manoa and says, we're going to give up, a substantial long-term piece, which presumably the Blue Jays would be looking for. They're not going to trade him for a rental, I wouldn't think. So you're giving up something substantial long-term for Manoa. I mean, why not add on to the package a little bit more and get a Tyler Glasnow or get a Corbin Burns or a Bieber, someone who you have more confidence in for 2024. So I don't know. If I had to guess, I think Manoa's staying with the Jays, entering camp, and trying to earn the fifth starter job.
Do you think that he has that spot locked up? Like, is there a spot waiting for him, or is he going to need to earn it?
I think he's going to have to earn it. I really do. Ross Atkins said that Manoa has a leg up, was his phrase. So he's the favorite, but it's going to depend on how he looks. And if you're a member of that coaching staff, you have to have an open competition. I think that, whether that's, Mitch White perhaps, or even a Ricky Tiedemann competing for a job, you have to be open-minded there. Now, I think Manoa is the best candidate and the most likely one to win that job because we've seen him pitch at a really high level before. So I think he probably will win it, but I don't think he goes in there with a guarantee on day one of spring training.
Ricky Tiedemann won Arizona Fall League Pitcher of the Year. Any chance at all? Do you put it at a 0% that he breaks camp with the team? There's probably no way out of spring training, right?
You know what? I'd put it higher than zero. Like I'd say it's like 5%. Because, even at the end of this past season, he made it to AAA briefly. He would have been a couple injuries away from, if the Jays had made a really long postseason run. And then let's say, for argument's sake, if something had happened to Meza has to go on the IL. Something else happens, another pitcher goes down. Like Tiedemann was probably a couple injuries away. It's not that he was close. But if he has an awesome spring, I don't know, and someone gets hurt, like it would take an injury, of course. He's not going to break with everyone fully healthy, but injuries happen. As much as we saw amazing health from the Jays this year, probably don't get quite as good of health next year. So if there's an injury and if Tiedemann's looking awesome, like that's a scenario where like that's why I say like there's a small percent chance, maybe it's 5%, something like that, where he does break with the opening day team.
What are your thoughts on the possibility of him making his MLB debut in 2024? Almost 100?
I'd say if he's healthy, he debuts in 2024. Okay. There's an injury could get in the way of that. Otherwise, yeah, we'll see him. And it'll be fun to see, right? He's got great stuff. He's excelling at a high level in the AFL and also in the minor leagues. He put up some big numbers in 2023. So it'll be fun to see what he can do, but a lot of the time it takes a few ups and downs. It takes some tests and some adversity at the major league level to get to that full potential.
So Ben, I want to talk really quickly Japan and just your thoughts on the fact that we have over the last half a dozen years seen an increase of Japanese players coming over. There's almost a big name to land every year, and it seems to be increasing. More and more Japanese players just seem to want to come over to Major League Baseball these days. I think Shohei Ohtani obviously plays a huge role in that. We're seeing Yoshinobu Yamamoto, who 25-year-old stud pitcher, trying to make that jump. What are your thoughts on Yamamoto, and can you see it getting to the point where we're seeing a dozen players a year coming over from Japan in the next 5 years?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that'd be really cool. It seems now that we get, a small handful, Imanaga as well coming over this year. Last year, of course, we had Yoshida and Kodai Senga, both of whom were quite good. Although Yoshida slowed down as the year wore on. Clearly, the top players in Japan can play at the MLB level and can excel here. So I think that, where there might have been questions once around what their transition looks like, we're seeing more players succeed, which gives the industry more confidence that the elite players from Japan can succeed here relatively seamlessly. And I'm sure on some level, it gives the players themselves that confidence when they see their peers succeeding in Major League Baseball. So I don't think this trend will slow down anytime soon. I mean, to go from 3 or 4 to 12 would be a big leap and might take some time, but it's awesome, to see the game on such a global level and so many stars from so many different places.
Yamamoto is a elite talent without a doubt, and definitely a different breed than you would normally see coming out of Japan because he's so young and because he's got such a high ceiling on him. What have you heard about the interest around Major League Baseball? We know it's quite high, and what are some reasonable landing spots for the guy?
Yeah, he's going to have so much interest. His agent Joel Wolf said publicly that he's never seen interest like this in a pitcher. So it sounds as though there are 20 plus teams interested. The Blue Jays, of course, being one of them. I don't expect the Blue Jays to land Yamamoto, although they have shown legitimate interest in him as the year has gone on here. So I think teams like the Giants, Dodgers, Yankees, Mets, and Red Sox are probably better positioned to land him. The deal could easily surpass $200 million in total commitment. So that's a big one, right?
That would be the highest. That would be the highest deal ever coming out of Japan, right?
Yeah, it would. Tanaka, I think, was like 156, somewhere in that range. So this would shatter the Tanaka, and I'm sure this will be over the Tanaka threshold. So yeah, we're looking at record money. Like you said, though, 25 years old, really good command. His home run suppression was elite this past year. Great strikeout numbers. I'm sure he'll allow more home runs in Major League Baseball, but he could be a frontline arm for the next 5, 6, 7 years, and those guys are really, really hard to come by.
Ben, I know we've only got you for about 6 more minutes here, so we'll get in trouble from our listeners if we don't get to some listener questions here. I'll throw that to you, Adam, and away we go.
Yeah, you bet. All right, first one comes in from Rinks, who says, maybe in general terms, but how much access do guys like you and Arden and Shai actually get to credible information? And if you do, how much of it is under some sort of NDA, aka you hear things that most don't, but you just can't talk about it, and real close to the vest kind of stuff? I'd have to assume a decent amount of the org is involved when researching players, so it can't be that much of a secret.
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think the Jays do a pretty good job of keeping that stuff under wraps, considering how many people are involved in, researching players, ranking them, and recruiting them. Because, with Shohei Ohtani, for example, I imagine that they probably made a recruitment video for Shohei Ohtani. So that's people in the creative department, right? I don't know that for a fact, but that's my guess. So all of a sudden you have all these different arms of the organization contributing. Now, they know it's their job at stake not to leak information. For the most part, that is like very, people follow that because it's their job, it's their livelihood. I think that the access when it comes to players is excellent. The access to John Schneider, I mean, we talked to him twice a day all year. Couldn't ask for more. Good access to coaches, front office. I mean, Ross Atkins typically available every couple of weeks throughout the season. So talk to him regularly. And then others around the organization, for example, at the GM meetings or at spring training, you get the chance to talk to them. So definitely no complaints when it comes to the access. You do hear some stuff that's on the record, of course, which we share, some stuff that's off the record, which you can maybe share a couple years after the fact once the information's no longer sensitive. But certainly in the moment, you hear things that you can't share. That's part of the job, of course, but it's also our job to research things that people don't want out there and to try to share them, and always try to do that whenever possible.
When something is off the record, how obvious is it? Like, do they say, hey, don't tell anyone? Or is it like just a look between you two and you go, okay, this is not for me to write about?
So that's a great question. Almost always it would be explicitly said, this is off the record. Okay. So, and then in contrast to that, maybe you run into someone, you're kind of, shooting the breeze, and, you're just talking about baseball. Okay. You're not going to quote them on that. But that's information that I could present maybe as my own opinion. For example, it's information that I could present as a baseball person said this. I'm not going to name who it was. But once someone says, hey, off the record, but we were actually pretty close on this player last year, then I'm going to say, all right, that's we're not going there. That's okay, fine.
You won't even hint at it in an article then.
No, exactly. Whereas if it's said in casual conversation and no one says it's off the record, then to me, that's more of background information.
Yeah. Very good. Next one comes from Ian. Says, are the Jays legit dark horses for Ohtani, or are they just a throw-in team in league conversations to drive up the market? Is there some gamesmanship afoot?
I would say all of the above. There's definitely gamesmanship. There's
what a terrible answer.
There's definitely gamesmanship. They are a dark horse. Teams, the Ohtani's camp might be using the Jays, but the Jays will want to sign Ohtani. How difficult is that going to be? Probably pretty difficult, but they're going to have some interest. And I'd say if you're a Jays fan, don't get your hopes up too high because you might be disappointed, but there will be some real conversations there.
We have a 1
Get ready
in 30
for it to be
chance.
leaked later that they were the number 2 team, right?
Yeah. Well, put it this way. I don't think that more than 8 teams are going to be actually serious, and the Jays will be one of those 8. So, but there are a lot of teams, right? You got Mets, Cubs, Rangers, Dodgers, maybe Yankees, probably not Mariners, maybe Padres, maybe Angels. I might be forgetting some. This is just off the top of my head. Giants. And then you get Jays. Yeah, of course, Giants 100% are in there. So, that's kind of the group. And Red Sox maybe. So, yeah, they're in that group. They might be 8th out of 8, but they're not 30th out of 30.
Mm-hmm. Could you tell me right now if you saw Shohei Ohtani at a Tim Hortons in Toronto, or would you have to keep your lips shut?
Of course. I mean, yeah, I would. If I saw Shohei Ohtani at a Tim Hortons, I would take a photo. I would tweet it.
Very good. Okay.
100%. There is no doubt in my mind.
Yeah. Right. Content gold. Yeah.
Yeah. I would also try to figure out what his order was,
Oh yeah.
Just out of curiosity, right? Like what's
a curious one.
A little hash brown maybe, I wonder.
Yeah.
All right.
Plain
last one
cream
then.
Cheese or flavored. Yeah.
Yeah.
Last one here. Mustard Tiger wants to know, what have you heard that's more than just, quote, due diligence? Is there anyone at all that we're actively pursuing?
I mean, Ohtani is more than just due diligence.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that you go into those waters with just a toe. I think that, like Chapman's more than due diligence. Votto is more than due diligence. But of course, Votto is not going to happen. Votto would have to sign after Shohei does, wherever those deals happen. Right. I would think that Votto and JD Martinez and Justin Turner would be on the list of players who kind of wait for the DH market to move with Ohtani. But yeah, Votto, Chapman, Suarez, they had interest in Eugenio Suarez, but ultimately weren't motivated enough to exceed what Arizona offered, which wasn't that much. So those are some players in whom they've had real interest.
Ben, thank you so much, my friend. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us a couple times a year. You literally have always made time for us, and I just want you to know how much we do appreciate it. All the best to you in December and the holidays and all that good stuff, and we'll bug you in the spring, see if we can get you back sometime throughout the season.
Yeah, sounds good, guys. And right back at you. And to anyone listening too, I know that a lot of folks listening make time for my thoughts, whether that's on Twitter or on TV or on radio or whatever the case. So thanks to everyone who's made time for my thoughts and observations on the Jays. That's much appreciated.
Very good.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, you got it, guys.
Cheers.